Good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon, late service. I get your vibes, but happy to be with you here today and continue this series that we've been in, If We Build It. And we might have lifted this title from a certain line, from a certain 90s baseball movie that you might be familiar with. And we might have even taken some creative license to change it a little bit. But really, it's a conversation about those moments in life where we feel called to take leaps of faith, to step out into the unknown. If you build it, they will come. We've been in a season as a community of taking these kind of leaps of faith. We just moved into 2 services. Then here we are now in our pledge season where we're really looking ahead to 2026 and really just asking, what are we going to be able to build together then? What are we going to be able to step out into in this next year? But no matter what, I know for a fact that you and I as individuals have these moments, have these times in our lives where we feel this call towards something. And so we started this series with that very first word, with that if, just to say that it's always an invitation. It's not a demand. It's not a must. It's an if. What if you moved in this direction? What if you followed that nudge? And then last week, we moved into the second word, we. Really asking, is we greater than just me? Because we are human beings wired for connection, wired for belonging, wired for collaboration. So what happens when we decide to build together? And then here we are, week 3, third word. I promise you, we're going to make it, right? We got one word a week. 1 week, we're just going to do the comma. You know what I mean? No. But here we are, week 3, build. What does it mean to build? See, this community is something that has been built by a group of people over many years, 25 plus years. It's been built physically, very literally, in fact, that there are some people who you've seen in this community who have actually had a hand in putting this physical building together. But I think even deeper, this place has been built metaphorically over these past decades. Something unique and sacred has been built, and it's been built with love. And as Mary said, that you and I are building it in this very moment with our presence, our shared awareness, and sharing this space together. But today I really want to ask, what are you building? What have you been building in your life? Or what is something that you want to build in your life, right? The intangibles. Maybe you've been building a family, right? You can look back upon many years of having built a family. Maybe you're in the process of, or you have built a relationship, a career, community. Maybe you've built a home. And we know that there is a big difference between building a house and building a home, right? So maybe that's something that you've built. And I think it really all leads to this reality that what we're truly all building is our life, right? Our life is this thing that we are constantly in process of building. I had the beautiful privilege of being a part of my grandmother's memorial service this past weekend, and in these moments, in these celebrations of life, what we see is we get to reflect on what someone has built throughout their life, the life that they have built for themselves. And, my grandma, she did not live extravagantly in terms of physical material wealth, not by any means, but when it came to love and connection and belonging, she was one of the wealthiest people I know. And so we were able to reflect on all that she had built in terms of love and connection and family, right? And that's really what we're all doing here in many ways. But maybe you have been building something specific. Maybe you've been building a house. I know some people in this community have actually been in the process of building a house, or maybe you've been building a business, a skill set. Maybe you've taken on a very specific task for a specific time. Maybe you're doing that alone. Maybe you're doing it in community, as we talked about last week. But I want to really kind of go back and ask the question, what does it mean that we as human beings, that we as living beings, are part of a long lineage of people and of animals and a really of this whole ecosystem of life where we all have this drive towards building. Where does that come from? And I'm really reminded of this phrase in Latin, imago Dei, which roughly translates to the image of God. And it comes from, this, if you're familiar with the Hebrew creation story, which I know, many of us probably are, there is this line in that story in Genesis where it says that human beings were created in the image of God, the image of the divine. And so people for thousands of years have been really asking this question, what is the imago Dei? What is the image of God? Right? Is it something physical? Does God look like me? Does God have my eyebrows? Because if God has my eyebrows, I want to have a conversation. How do you maintain these eyebrows, right? What kind of work are you putting in? But many have reflected throughout the centuries that perhaps imago Dei means something different, means something intangible. Because if you look at the point in the story where it's described that human beings are made in the image of God, what we know of God at that point is that God is a creator. God is that which is bringing about life. God is the source of life. And so if that's what we know of God when it is described that human beings are made in the image of God, then the question has been asked, perhaps the image of God is really the capacity to create. Right? And whether or not you have a belief in God or however you choose to name it, right? We look at a universe that is constantly bringing new things into creation, right? And perhaps it is our birthright. Perhaps it is part of who we are as people, as children of this beautiful cosmos, to also create in turn. We don't just see this in the human world. Certainly not, right? We think about ants, right? Think about the amazing things that ants create in coordination together, the incredible colonies they create. Or think about, the birds, the beautiful birds we have here in Tucson, and think about their nests and how they make these elaborate nests in order to protect and safe keep their young. There's this wonderful documentary I was able to see just a couple weeks ago. It was playing in theaters here. It's now, I think, available anywhere. You can just rent it. But it's called The American Southwest, and it's a beautiful nature wildlife documentary that really gets deep into the very region, the part of the world that we live in, and really how human beings and animals have built their lives in this region and using the resources of this region for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so there's this amazing section in this film and you can see it in the right side, but I'll do a closer look, on beavers. And if you were not obsessed with or had not fallen in love with beavers up until this point, I promise you this documentary will win you over, for I am now a huge fan. Because, there's this amazing sequence where they show that beavers have this trade. They teach this trade to their children. And this is the trade of building. This is what they do. They build. And they say in the documentary that their highest goal in life is to build a secure and comfortable home and place to live for their family. And then the documentary moves on and it ends up then flashing towards the Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, which if you don't know is these beautiful homes built into these incredible stone walls by indigenous populations thousands and thousands of years ago. And it just illustrates how whether humans, whether animals, we have for thousands, millions of years been building and been trying to coexist and build with the natural order of things. And it really begs the question, is this capacity to build part of our DNA, right? Is this the imago Dei? Certainly our ancestors were doing this for safety, for shelter, really, really meeting their survival needs. But then you have us, right? And we build for other reasons, because as we've moved up the hierarchy, we're fortunate enough to often have a lot of our shelter needs met. And so we build for other reasons. Sometimes we build for ease and convenience, right? Like, you might have at times in your life said, like cutting a banana the old-fashioned way is too much work. Someone out there decided to build a banana slicer and make your life easier. And if you don't think this is a valuable tool, I do want to point out to you that this tool saved someone's marriage. Says Miss Toledo, what can I say about the banana slicer that hasn't already been said about the wheel, penicillin, or the iPhone? So we build some things, right, to make our lives easier. Sometimes we build things to be remembered by. You look at things like the pyramids and you see how we often create things so that future generations will look back and see what we have done. Sometimes, and this is particularly true of maybe people in the arts, that often we build things for the sake of the work itself, for the sake of doing it. That often, artists create because of the joy of creation, not necessarily too caught up in the end result. Sometimes we build things in order to meet a need for others. We have this Nutty Narrows Bridge, which was built in Longview, Washington in 1963, and it's a squirrel highway overpass so that squirrels do not have to endanger themselves by crossing the highway. So as human beings, we do things on behalf of others, right? This restored a little bit of faith in humanity when I saw this, right? So we build for all these reasons, and then maybe every once in a while, we build something that really no one asked for, no one needs, and we do it just because we can. Moving on, we all build, friends. All of us build. And you might be out there, and you might be like me, and you might say, well, when it comes to the material world, I don't know if I'm that much of a builder. And I'll be honest, I haven't really even put together a piece of IKEA furniture. That's a little daunting and above my pay grade. I have put together some of those really basic, like Amazon pieces of furniture where it's just like screwing a couple things together, and I feel incredibly accomplished when I finish that. I'm like, you, sir, have earned a day at the spa, So I can't, say in all honesty that I'm much of a builder when it comes to material things, but I have had the privilege of being a part of building something here. And so I wanted to just have a conversation about what it means to build. What are some things that it requires of us when we're going to really show up to our lives and show up to the things that we are being invited to build? And the first is that when we build stone by stone, right? A house is built brick by brick. Your life is built day by day. The habits that you're trying to build, they're really built moment by moment, right? Choice by choice. The relationships that you're hoping to build, they come together action by action. I happen to know someone very well who is starting a bakery business, and she does it loaf by loaf, right? When we build, really, we build stone by stone, but the problem is that we tend to look at the end product and we get caught up in how daunting it is, and we lose sight of the stone that's right in front of us. I'll give you an example. It comes from a great story told by a wonderful author named Lamott. And Lamott wrote a memoir called Bird by Bird. And there's a great story that really displays how she got this title. I'm going to read you this story. She says this: 30 years ago, my older brother, who was 10 years old at the time, was trying to get a report on birds written that he'd had 3 months to write, which was due the next day. Has anyone been in that situation before, right? Flashbacks, yeah. Don't. He was at the kitchen table, close to tears, surrounded by binder paper and pencils and unopened books about birds, immobilized by the hugeness of the task ahead. Then my father sat down beside him, put his arm around my brother's shoulder, and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird." Have you ever been immobilized by a task in front of you? We get so caught up. We look at the end result. We look at step 100 when we're probably on step 1 or 2, right? And it can paralyze us. What would it mean for you to start looking at things bird by bird? What is your bird? Because defining your bird, defining that one thing that is in front of you today, in this moment, right? The piece by piece way that you can take things, defining that can be so crucial, right? Maybe you're looking at a relationship and your bird is that one kind thing you could do today, that one open-hearted action you can take. Maybe you're trying to build a life here in Tucson. Maybe you've moved from another state. Maybe your bird is that one way that you can be adventurous today, that one way that you can step outside of your comfort zone. Maybe you do have some kind of creative task or project. What is that one thing you can do today in this moment? When we define our bird and then we become patient enough to take things bird by bird, it transforms the entire process, bird by bird, friends. The second way we might look at building is that when we build rain or shine, right? In other words, we have to show up each day, right? Regardless of the season, regardless of the weather. Because how many of us know that when it comes to the things in our lives, our responsibilities, our tasks, the things that we are called to, how many of us know that we are not going to feel equally motivated every single day? Right? That some days we're going to wake up and the last thing that we're going to want to do is to show up as our full selves in that relationship or that job or that certain creative pursuit or project. Right? Sometimes it's the hardest thing. How do we keep going? There's an author I very much admire by the name of Stephen Pressfield. He wrote a book called The War of Art. And what he describes in this book is that, if you're an artist, if you're a builder, if you're trying to bring something into the world, he talks about this transition from being an amateur to going pro. And what he basically says is that to go pro is to realize that above all else, the most important thing we could do is show up, right? The most important thing to do when it comes to building is just to show up every day through the resistance, right? Through the rain, through the things that we want to avoid. So he puts it this way: the amateur believes they must first overcome their fear, then they can do their work. The professional knows that fear can never be overcome. They know there is no such thing as a fearless warrior or a dread-free artist, right? We just show up anyway. That's the commitment, right? Because friends, if we're waiting until the coast is clear, if we're waiting until things are easy, right? Things are without resistance or things are without challenge, we're going to be waiting a long, long time. We say things, forever. We say things in our marriage vows that have become so normative in our culture. Things like, in sickness and in health, right? In other words, we're saying, hey, this commitment that I am making, it is stronger than how I may feel in a given moment. So if you're going to commit to that which you are building in your life, part of what you're committing to is to say that I'm not going to abandon this when things get hard. What does it mean for you to go pro? What are some areas of your life that are inviting you to go pro? The last is that when we build, what we are really doing is we are seeing the unseen. Because when we go to build, we must start by seeing something that does not yet exist, that is not yet there. This anonymous person who I mentioned before, who is starting a bread business, I live with her, and she also is a wonderful chef. And, I'm so lucky to have, to live with someone who's such a great cook. And she has this really uncanny ability to kind of envision. She can see and taste the meal before she's even started to make it. And that's what makes it so powerful. She can kind of envision it. And I was looking around the art in this room today, these wonderful tapestries created by Liz Halstead, who she's, so generously allowed to be showcased here, seasonally. And I was reminded, I look at this art and I'm thinking she must be able to envision this finished product and even the feel of it, the texture of it, before it even has begun to exist in the world. That is part of the task of building and creating. Even for me, I feel like a huge honor of my life is that what I get to build in part are these, times that we have together on Sunday morning. And the reality for me is that, I spend a lot of time envisioning what it's going to feel like to be together, right? Like I've thought about this very moment like hundreds of times before we got here. And that's just part of how I like to do things. But it's a reminder for me that our imagination is not this childish thing that we've so often relegated it to, this word that we use like, our imagination. It's like you're creating something fake or whatever. Our imagination is our capacity to envision something that does not yet exist but can, right? It's our sight into possible futures. And friends, often what you are building in the world may not exist. There might not be a template. There certainly are probably not going to be instructions for you building the very life that you're trying to build because no one has been you before. Have you ever felt that when it came to your spirituality and your spiritual path, that maybe in conversation when talking about it, sometimes words really fail, right? That it can be impossible to describe the complexities, the nuances of what you've been experiencing on your spiritual journey, right? That you might not be able to say, well, I don't really know. I can't really name exactly what I'm experiencing. I don't know exactly where I'm going. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's a good sign. It's a sign that you're doing something new and something that is your own. As Carl Jung would say, if the path before you is clear, you're probably on someone else's. Yeah. Sometimes, when it comes to the thing that we're doing, when it comes to the path that we're on, sometimes the opposite exists, and that can also illuminate the way for us. Author and podcaster who I admire, his name is Rob Bell. He talks about not North Stars, but South Stars. See, North Stars are the things that we are guided towards. Sometimes we are guided away from things, right? So maybe for you, you came up in a certain tradition or culture, even just a way of being that you witnessed in the world, and you said, I'm actually going to do the opposite. That's not what I want to be. How many of us, if we're honest, would admit that in some ways our spirituality might be a reaction to some things that we were handed when we grew up, right? And when we're kind of moving in a different direction. Or maybe we are repairing something that we were handed. Maybe we are rebuilding. We're not just builders, but we're rebuilders. And I look at our world, I look at our society and the structure that has been dominant in our world for centuries, right? And I think we all have intuited on some level that there is something broken about the structure that we live in, right? That we are harming our planet, we know that, right? That we are experiencing unbelievable polarization and division, not just within our own country, but, throughout the world. We see an unbelievable disparity of wealth between the rich and the poor. We know on some level that there is something broken about our system. And friends, I'm not talking about the last year or the last 5 years or even the last 10. I'm talking about something that has been in place for decades and even centuries. And yet we also might be feeling that something new wants to emerge. Something new is trying to break through. But in order to do so, it must stand with and it must even transcend that which is currently in place, right? And maybe you felt this on some level in your own life, right? Like I'm trying to do something new, and yet I'm sort of having to compete or feel like in tension with that which is currently in place, that current existing order. How do we relate to that? How do we overcome it without just being people that can only tear things down without building things up? And I love this quote from Buckminster Fuller, who, I've shared this before, but I just find it so powerful. It's been a guiding light for me in just the work of what we do here at Aldea. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Instead of just simply fighting, can we transcend? Right? What are you trying to build that perhaps is an entirely new way of seeing things? I look at our community, and I'm reminded of this because in many ways, our community, we're doing something that really doesn't exist in the world, at least in very many places. And this makes it hard at times, but it's also what makes this so rewarding that we're doing something that I know fills this very unique and special need for so many of us. Certainly as a community, we have some South Stars, right? We know the kinds of expressions of spirituality or religion that we do not want to be. And in many ways, we are rebuilding and reclaiming and repairing what spiritual community or even church can be in the world. But my invitation for you today is this. Can you name for yourself? Can you take a moment and just name for yourself, what is it that you're trying to build? And maybe even more so, are you willing to accept some of the challenges and difficulties that are going to come along the way? Right? That most likely there's not going to be a map or an instruction manual for what you're building. Maybe to build what you're building, you need to come up against a current structure that doesn't work anymore. Maybe you're rebuilding or you're repairing, and some days you're like, is it even worth it? Is there enough here to salvage? All of these questions, all of these challenges, all of these obstacles, may we say yes to all of them, because this is what it means to be alive and to be a builder and to be the Imago Dei. I want to close with just a couple of little addendums, little asterisks to all this, because I think it's, just a couple things I think are important for us to remember. And that is this: when we are approaching something new and we are trying to have vision for something that doesn't yet exist, it's important to have that vision, and yet at the same time, it's important to be flexible, because there are so many things that only reveal themselves when the process of building has begun. And even more so, this happens in collaboration, this idea of we. Because when we are in collaboration, this teaches us to stay open to what others bring to the table. The next thing is that I encourage all of us, and I need this reminder for myself, may we enjoy the process. May we not get caught up in this illusion that one day we're going to arrive, right? Or one day the work is going to be done, right? Our lives are a constant, endless process of building and rebuilding. And when we get caught up in the end result, we miss the beauty of the right now, right? May we not miss any of those birds by bird, I don't know. You can do with that what you want. You can go home and you could be like, I don't know if it's birds by birds or bird by bird. Jake said one thing. You can quote me. I'll allow that. But the question I have for you is this. Just ask yourself, like, where's the joy for me today? Where is it showing up in this moment, in this task, versus just thinking about the finish line? I'll just say this about our community. We are building something that I believe is not just a community, it's also a way of life. It's also a vision for an entirely new way of having spiritual community, of having church, of gathering with people who are pursuing this same way of being in the world. And so this conversation about the pledge is one way that you can participate in that. If you're going to build anything, you need materials. And really, the pledge campaign is just our way of trying to understand what are the materials that we're going to have in the coming year, right? So that's one way to do it. Another way is we are always a community that is co-created through volunteer efforts, right? So if you're interested in just bringing your time, your energy, some of your passion and insight to this community, there are always ways for you to volunteer. And everything you've seen on this stage today, other than myself, has been done through volunteer efforts and people who have shown up to things that are even maybe in some cases outside of their comfort zones, and they've watched so much growth come from that. So think about how you might feel called to participate in what's being built here in this community. But ultimately, friends, whatever it is you're building, may you remember that you are not alone, and that even when you face the disorientation or the uncertainty, may you look at that and say, well, of course I am, because I'm doing something new in the world. And as you do it, take it bird by bird, right? Show up rain or shine. And may you have the courage to see the unseen, so that all the challenges you face, all the obstacles, they are all worthwhile, because this is what it means to build.